Hello, grade 12 students. Mr. Rowell here with your first tutorial of the course. In this tutorial, we're going to be talking about file input and output, some simple ways to be able to read from and write to files. You should have by now read through a good chunk of those notes and gotten a sense that there's actually a lot of different ways that we can go about doing this. But we're choosing to focus on one that's nice and straightforward, that gives us access to a lot of really helpful methods in the scanner class. And we'll be using that to kind of center a lot of our input-output work for now around. So what I'm going to do for the first example is I'm actually going to read information from a file. In order to be able to do that, we need the file to exist in the first place. In my project folder, where I'm currently working in, if I create the file here, it's going to save me some trouble in the long run. I'm going to create a new text document. I'm going to call this test, not file, tile, test file. And in this test file, I'm going to add some text. How about count 1, count 2, count 3, just so there's a differentiation between each line. All right, I'm going to exit out of this. So I have a very simple text file. Let's see if I can snag the information from this and import it into my project in NetBeans. The first thing that I need to do is let NetBeans know what this file is to connect a file into my project. To do so, I'm going to be using the file class that you saw in your notes. I'll call this file my file, and I'll use its constructor, which is to state the name of the file source. In this case, testfile.txt. Now, because this is stored in my project folder, I'm able to reference it directly. It's going to find it right here in my project folder. If it wasn't right there in the local address, I'd have to give it its full address, C:// or whatever drive it's in all the different folders, which you can do, but unnecessary if you store it in the same folder as your project. I also need to import my Java.io file. I can also press Control-Shift-I to have it automatically do so for me, which is always really helpful. And there we go. Now I have this project recognizing that this file exists. And now I need to be able to create the logic to do something with this. Anytime I'm dealing with a file, I need to create a try-catch block. Because I am always at risk when I'm running an input-output scenario that there could be an I/O, an input-output exception that I need to handle. I need to import this exception, Control-Shift-I once again, import it up here. And you'll notice that there's still an error appearing. That's simply because I haven't actually filled out the logic for the try yet. So it's like, I'm not going to catch nothing. So that'll fix itself in due time. So I always like to create the block here in the first place. You can always do that afterwards if you prefer. And once this is caught, I might have it print out to console error reading file. That's what I'm attempting to do here. All right, so now we have to define the logic of what's going on inside when we're trying to read the information in this file. And we're going to be using the class that I showed you in the notes called FileReader. I'll call mine FileReader just to make it really, really clear. What is it? It's a new FileReader. And I'm going to import that class. I need to do one more thing, however. I need to send this file reader something in its constructor. The file reading is expecting a file. I called mine my file. We're going to send it my file. Now it's happy. Great. So now this file reader is going to be working for us, pulling data from this file. But I still need one more step to be able to work with this data. And here's where the scanner class comes in. I'm going to create a new scanner. Import the scanner class, Control-Shift-I, and I need to tell it in its constructor where it's getting its data to scan from. In the past, we've used system.in to get data from the keyboard, but we're not doing that this time. This time, we're getting that data from our file reader. This input is going to be getting its information straight from this file reader object. All right. Now that we have all of that logic set up, we're going to be able to actually work with this file now and input its information. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to create a while loop. And we're going to say while input has a next line. While our file, the information from our file that's being streamed into us, has a next line of information to read from, it's not null, we are going to be assigning that information somewhere. Now, we might need to use different types of data storage for this assignment. At some point, maybe you use arrays, maybe array lists, or in this case, with a simple file like this, we'll start at the beginning and just assign it to a string. I might call the string line because I'm going to read from my input scanner the next line. All of the information that's on the line that I'm currently reading will be assigned to this string. And now what I can do, I just want to see what my file has in store for me. So I'm going to have it print out that line of information for me. So what do I have here in my while loop? As long as there's another line to read, it's going to read it and assign its information to a string that it then prints out to console. This is just going to allow me to see if I've actually accessed this data properly. I'm not really saving it for the long term. I need a better form of data storage for that. But for now, we're just going to make sure it works. One final thing for me to do, I need to take my file reader and close it. This is going to basically be the equivalent of like when I have my file open like this. Maybe you've had this in the past, or if I do this and then I try to rename the file, maybe I want to name it test file 2. Why didn't it let me with the text file? Normally, when we're working with something like Word where it's holding it in its temporary memory, we aren't allowed to change the name while the program's open. I guess I forgot that Notepad created some kind of a local version of itself, but that's for another day to talk about. Generally speaking, most files aren't going to allow you to access them again while they're currently open. And so we need to close it before something else is going to access it in the future. Just in some cases like this, it's just good form. In other cases, it's absolutely essential for things to work as expected. All right, now the moment of truth. Now that we've set all our logic up, let's see if we're able to run and get the information from our file, which we see right here succeeded beautifully. Wonderful. This is a nice simple example of how to pull information from a file to deal with more complex circumstances or to read and store information while we're gathering the next line. We could assign that information rather than to a string to an array or array list or some other data structure to be able to work with it more in the future, which you'll be doing in your own exercises. But let's also take a peek at what we might do in a second example here to be able to write information to a file. So what I'm going to be doing now is I'm going to be writing to a new file. I'm going to be creating a reference to a file that doesn't exist yet. Unlucky for us, the file constructor, let me just get this typing in here. If this file doesn't exist that I'm writing to, it's going to create it for me automatically. I'm just going to import my file right here. So I'm creating a new file, and this time, if I look in my project folder, I don't have that file existing yet. But this, when we get the logic flowing here, it will create the file for us. So let's try to get this up and running. Let's change this to the way I like to look at it here. I'm going to make sure I set up my try catch block with my IO exception in here. And in this case, I'm going to say error printing to file. That's the scenario I'm now working with. Import my IO exception. It says an error because I need to still put in the information here. All right, let's do this. The class we're going to be using for this is called the FileWriter. I'll call mine FileWriter just to be really clear. And this FileWriter is going to be writing to none other than the new file that I created above. Let's get that import going. Now that this is created, notice the exception has stopped complaining at us because now there's actually something being attempted. Wonderful. And this FileWriter is going to be writing to the file that we created, but we need an actual other layer to this to be able to get this working properly. If you remember back here in our scanner, the file reader, it was kind of the link between the file and us. but it wasn't enough to actually do all the operations. I had to use another class to do the operations of the reading. Kind of similar thing here. The FileWriter is the link between us and the file, and I need to use another class to actually perform the task of doing the writing through the link. Here's how this works. We're going to use a class here called printWriter. Let's just call this one output for now. Is new printWriter, and we are going to be, with the printWriter, accessing the FileWriter. We're working with the FileWriter. Import that class there. Awesome. So this printWriter, we've called output, is going to allow us to access some methods to be able to write to our file that we created. Let's think of what we want to output to this. Just to show you how easy it is to write new files, let's create, let's see, how about the numbers 0 to 1,000 in a nice ordered way, just to see how easy it is to write to a file here. So I'm going to create a for loop. Actually, first, let's just put a title to see how this works to our file itself. There's some information in our file here. So I'm going to hit output, and you'll notice that in this, there's a series of methods that allow me to print all sorts of different things. This operates very much like system.out. So I'm going to print line to this file. This is my new file. I can count to 1,000. All right. So that should be written to the file. All right, let's go to the next step and see what else we can define here. Let's do a for loop. For int I equals 0. I'm going to set up some logic, a good reminder here of how we can set up a more complex for loop here. I'm going to say from 0 to 99, and then I want this to loop again. Up to 1,000, increment it for this, and each time that this runs, I want it to print, just print this time, some variable that I haven't defined yet. I'm actually going to define this up here. Int num is 0, our starting point, so I want it to print that number. And then I want it to leave some space, so I'm going to stick in a tab here to leave some space between each data input, and then I'm going to increment my number so that it keeps on going up. Once it's actually created each of the numbers in the right spots, I'm going to have it print a line to be able to provide the right spacing between the different numbers. Feel free to pause if you want to make sense of this a little bit more. What I need to do after this is I need to make sure at the end of my logic that this FileWriter is closed. FileWriter close. Because once I open it, as long as this is open, it's going to consider that file being open, and it's not actually going to show me the final results of it until I've closed it. So if you ever think you've written to a file and it's blank, even though you think your logic's right, you very likely forgot this step to close that file at the end of it all. So let's see what happens here when we hit run. I'm going to run this. It says build successful. I'm going to pop over here and notice output file appears as a new file. And if I open this thing up, I'm going to see that what didn't exist before now exists in all of its beautiful counting to 1,000 data structure. Don't know what use this would be for anyone, but it's kind of cool to see it pop up so nice and easily. And I can create whatever I want and send it to a text file using my coding, using this methodology. I hope that that was helpful for you and that you can use this basic structure to start experimenting with some of the exercises to come. There'll be one more tutorial video to come where I show you a little bit more about how to set up your project to be able to deal with this set of challenge problems to start off this next unit. Thanks for watching.